Good morning. Just waiting a few minutes to see who else is going to join me today.
Good morning.
Good morning, Sunshine. How are you?
Good. How are you?
I'm doing all right. I'm pretty good. I'm tired today, but I'm good. Feels like this week has been really long, even though it's only Thursday. Well, it's Thursday, but it feels like it's 2 weeks packed in one.
Yes.
Yeah. You already got some breakfast. That's good. You're a step ahead of me. I made
Very
coffee.
hungry.
I didn't get to drink it yet, so
Uh, just turn off your video and go get it.
right? Oh, I don't know. It's really weird. I'm trying to find the right balance of the right day and time that works for a lot of people. And, I thought Thursday mornings at this time would be great. And last week I had like three or four people on, but um, I mean, there's 25 people easily that ask me every week, like, hey, can I join your group? Or, that are asking me where the link is or whatever. And then on Thursdays, they don't show up. So I don't know. So it's strange.
Yeah.
Yeah. Anywho, well, today we're going to talk about negotiating the home inspection. And again, even if it's just you, I'm going to
Mhm.
talk. I'm talking to a big group because it's always recorded. And here comes
Yeah.
that. Whoops, there you go. Hang on.
Yep. I gotta actually get my notebook. Hang on a second.
No, you're good. Good morning. Good morning, Kat.
Good morning.
Thanks for joining us. I'm glad you're
Thanks for
here.
inviting me.
Absolutely. We should have a couple more stragglers. I usually have a few stragglers in a few minutes, but I go ahead and get started anyway. Welcome. Since it's just the three of us right now, tell us a little bit about you, real quick, if you don't mind. Like how long you've been in real estate, and just so I know who I'm talking to.
Oh, are you talking to me?
Yeah, yeah. Sorry, I know,
Okay.
Kim.
Okay. Been in real estate for a total of 7 years. I started in 2007. Then in
Okay.
2008, the market crashed. We didn't have all the free advertising and stuff, and I didn't really have any support to work through it. So by the time my realtor dues came up for 2009, I was like, I'm done. I can't afford it. It
Sure.
was a side hustle anyway, so it wasn't like a super blow. Then I made the decision to retire from the legal field after 30 years.
Wow.
And I'm not the type of person who can sit still. So I was like, hey, let's go back into real estate. So I've been doing it again for 5 years.
Okay.
And I've been with EXP Realty for 4 years. Absolutely love it.
Good.
Um, I live smack dab in the middle of, oh, hi, puppers. Oh, I have a German Shepherd too.
Oh yeah.
She's sleeping on her bed right now. Um,
What a good girl.
yes, I live smack dab in the middle of a square that would connect Cincinnati, Dayton, Columbus, and the Ohio River. So I relocated from Washington State to Ohio about 2 years ago. And I
Wow.
made the decision if it's going to take me an hour to get to Cincinnati, Dayton, and Columbus, I might as well serve the entire area. So I literally serve all of Southwest Ohio.
Wow. Okay. That's awesome. I mean, you might as well, if you're gonna drive an hour, you might as well drive an hour to get all of them, right? Like
And
it's
that's the thing. It didn't make any sense to me not to be willing to go to those other places if I have to drive an hour to the city. So,
yeah. And as long as you're familiar enough with those areas, why not? I love it. That's
yep.
great.
I've made
Um,
myself familiar.
well, I've moved my business 4 times to 4 different states. So trust me, I've had to learn the areas and learn the different neighborhoods and the cities and what to expect like all over again multiple times. So, we owe it to ourselves and to our clients, like especially if you're going to be selling real estate, to kind of know the area enough to be able to give people a proper tour and what to expect, and know what the neighborhood, what the values are in the neighborhoods and things like that. So I love it. Well, thank you for sharing your story with us. I appreciate that very much.
Yeah, no
We're gonna
problem.
we're going to dive in a little bit. I mean, you've been in real estate enough long that some of the stuff that I'm probably going to talk about today might be like, oh, I already know all this, because we're actually talking about negotiating the home inspection. Um, but I teach a different approach than a lot of people do. And there's a lot of discussion among trainers, mentors, coaches, and brokers about really warning their agents not to help the clients negotiate the home inspection due to liability issues. And so I want to start with that, because I want to discuss that first before we get into the nitty gritty of everything I've got today. Is the reality is that we as agents, our clients rely on us to help advise them, consult with them, to give them advice. And so when someone tells you, hey, you just don't, hands off on the report, you're taking on too much liability when you tell a client what to ask for to be repaired or whatnot. How many home inspections do you think your clients have negotiated? Some of them none, right? Some of them, maybe they've only bought one house. How do they know which items are things that are typical that a seller might repair or give money for in lieu of repairs or something like that? So I am definitely not of the opinion that I think we take on liability for everything we do. We live in you're in the law field. We live in a litigious society too, where people sue each other over all kinds of things. In this job, you're taking on liability the minute you open your mouth. So if you're worried about liability, go do something else, right? We're going to take on liability. There's lots of ways to cover your butt. There's lots of ways to, practice real estate with covering yourself or minimizing liability. But to tell an agent you should not help your client negotiate the home inspection, where's your value? What do they need you for? Right? So I don't subscribe to that. I do understand that there is some liability in the ways that some agents are helping negotiate, but we'll talk about ways that you can do that. That's a lot that's going to cover you a little bit more and mitigate some of that liability as well. But I wanted to start off by saying I do not subscribe to the theory that you should not help your clients negotiate the home inspection. I feel like that is a big part of your value. They are relying on you and your expertise and what you've seen every day and the other inspections you've come across and how those were reacted to and how to fix them and can they be fixed and those kinds of things. Your clients don't have that experience, so they need you for that. Okay, so I just wanted to start off with that. If you've ever heard somebody tell you, hands off, don't get involved in negotiating, you're opening yourself up to litigation. We already know we open ourselves up to litigation, right? So I'm going to start with there.
I've never heard that. I've never heard that advice before.
No, so. It's making its way across from trainers and coaches and brokers in the last 2 years. I have seen more brokers tell their agents, just give your client the report and ask them what they want to have fixed with no consultation, no advice. They're telling them that you're opening yourself up to liability. They're telling them that they're going to get sued. And I feel like in this world that we live in, they don't need you, they need you for certain things. This is one of them.
Well, and so many clients give you that laundry list of stuff. And I learned early on, I'd be like, okay, review the report, tell me what you want repaired. And they give you a laundry list of little things that they can easily do themselves, or heck, I'll pay a handyman $200 to come fix them for you before you move in. So, that's where, and of course I've learned now I go through the entire report with my clients. And, if they say, oh, well, what about this? Then we talk about it and do's and don'ts. But I would think coming down to the liability part, that's what your errors and omissions insurance is for. Right. So it's kind of like a homeowner's insurance or your car insurance, let's put it that way. Like I got in a fight with the mailbox one time and got my door stuck. It was one of those covered and enclosed mailbox things. And I got my door stuck between the bank of mailboxes and the post. And I couldn't get it out. And so it's like when you do something like that, that's what your car insurance is for. If you're not going to use it for stupid stuff like that, why pay for it?
Right.
And I mean, of course, we have to have it. And I had to have liability insurance in the legal field. But, it's like, use it. That's what it's for if there's an issue. And if you do your job well enough, you fall back on and rely on what's in that inspection report, then there really aren't going to be any liability issues because you're simply repeating what you've seen.
Sure. there are some agents that I have seen have gotten themselves into trouble in terms of negligence, and negligence is not covered by your errors and omissions insurance. So you have to be cautious and careful in terms
Yeah,
of, should you have known that this was a big issue? Did you have the skill set, the competency to recognize that this is something that should have been addressed, right? I
and if
can
it's
see a
something
case
like
there. Yeah.
yeah, and if it's something like that, sorry to interrupt you.
No, you're
I
fine.
always the inspectors I work with always make themselves available to my clients.
Yeah.
And so, if they say, well, like hot water heater, it's reached its end of life, recommend replacing. And I tell them, look, it's only $2,000 if you pay for a professional to come and install it. If you feel comfortable doing it yourself, it's less than $500. And if they keep harping on it, like, well, I'm really worried about that. What if it starts leaking before I can replace it? And I'll be like, well, if you want, let's bring in the inspector and you can talk to him about that. So I think it goes both ways. Some people take it too far in terms of the advice that they give. I have to be careful because my husband's a contractor, so I know a lot more than the average realtor. And so I have to be careful with that, like you said, because of liability issues. But then also at the same time, not saying enough and just relying, I think there's liability there that you
Yeah.
didn't do your due diligence to represent your client's best interest.
Right, agreed. So my stance and my approach, and we're going to get into what I call the Fab Five in a second, and how I present the report to my clients to help keep them focused on big ticket items that are costly, that are concerning, that are worrisome, that could be a legitimate reason to terminate a contract over. We're not going to squabble over a switch plate cover that's $2. We are not going to worry about a loose screw that I have keep a screwdriver in my car so I can tighten up whatever comes up on the home inspection anyway. Like, I'm not worried about that kind of stuff. What we're worried about are big ticket items that are going to be costly or concerning to the client, things that are outside of a typical homeowner's realm of expertise or ability to fix, right? But first, let's talk about setting proper expectations, because I believe you actually have better success when you set proper expectations on the front end before you even schedule the home inspection, right? And don't worry, Kat, about, and this is a discussion. I'm presenting a lot of information, but I do want you to participate. So don't worry about interrupting me. If you have something you want to interject or share, please do. I actually like that. So don't worry about if you've got something you want to add. So the big thing about setting expectations is that I feel like when a client, especially a first-time home buyer, but it doesn't have to be a first-time home buyer, when they get that inspection report, they are freaking out. It's 92 pages long.
Right.
It includes all kinds of things that are not necessarily defects. Remember, you want to let your client know that you're hiring this person to come through and really investigate every crevice of the house that they can access. But you want them to understand that report also includes home maintenance items that the buyer might need to know about in the future, how to properly maintain their home, prevent damage. It also includes disclosure items, like things that they just want the buyer to know about. It's not necessarily a defect. It might be something that they just want them to know that, hey, this is how it is built. There's nothing wrong with that. I just need you to know that that's how it's built. There are things that they have to disclose, or maybe they have polybutylene pipes, or crazy things that they just want the buyer to know. But it doesn't necessarily mean that it is a defect that the seller is required to repair. Might just be a disclosure issue that the buyer needs to be aware of. And then the third thing is that the inspector is going to list defects, right? Those defects usually are prioritized in the report. Typically, they will have like a summary section where they've called out the defects only, so that the rest of the report has the maintenance and the disclosure issues and things like that. But not always. And you also need to be careful. Don't just read the summary of the inspection report, because sometimes there are things within the report that is more detailed and actually kind of scary to a client that didn't get carried over on the summary. You need to actually look through the whole report. And I've been guilty of that myself, where I just skimmed through the summary and only addressed items on the summary. And my client called me and said, well, what about what he wrote on page 42? Did you see the picture and did you read that? Because that wasn't on the summary page. You just need to be careful. They are humans. They use software that will extract the defect items, but I'm telling you, don't skip the report. Go through the whole report and just make sure that you understand. So first of all, we just need to set proper expectations and make sure that the client knows what to expect when they get that report back. I always warn them, do not freak out when you get the 92-page report back. It's going to be mixed with these three things, right? Just some home maintenance items, some disclosure items, and some defects. But remember the purpose of the report of the inspection to begin with. And see here, I've got somebody trying to get into the, sorry. Remember what the purpose of the inspection is. This buyer wants to make sure that there's not something majorly wrong with the house that would make them want to terminate their contract. A lot of agents lose sight of what the purpose of this inspection is. They think, you know, and even the buyers, they think, oh, well, I'm going to get it inspected and I'm going to demand that the seller fix all these things. That's not necessarily the case. In a lot of markets, especially where it's a seller's market, you know, the buyer might not even have the opportunity to ask the seller to make repairs. They have to make a decision whether or not they want to move forward with the house or not. And they might be taking it as is. They might be making a determination, is it pass fail? You just want to set the expectation that, remember, we are trying to decide if you want to move forward with purchasing this house. And is there something on the report that makes you feel uneasy that this house is not the right house for you, or that this house might have repairs that are too costly to make, right? Don't get so fixated on your presentation to your client that everything that comes up on their report can be or should be fixed by the seller. That's not the purpose of the inspection. The purpose of the inspection is to give the buyer peace of mind, right? To give the buyer peace of mind about what could be wrong with the house so that they're not uncovering a money pit, right? Or they're not buying a money pit. But just remember, at the end of the day, the goal was for them to get to the closing table and to feel secure with the house that they're buying. So don't focus so much on everything being something that the seller has to repair. As markets shift back and forth, and again, as we're having a market correction now, more and more buyers are getting to ask for repairs. They're getting to ask for credits from the seller instead of doing the repairs, whatever that looks like in your market. But not everything is to be repaired by the seller. Keep that in mind, okay? So let's talk about the Fab Five. So I always make sure that I explain to my buyers prior to scheduling the home inspection, prior to scheduling. So this is not something I address after we get the inspection. I remind them of this after we get the inspection, but I am telling them when I book the appointment that I'm letting them know. We'll get back to who books the appointment in a second. Remind me if I forget, because you know me, I'll go off on the rest of my stuff. But I forgot to talk about that. So when I book that appointment, I'm sending them an email that basically says, hey, just so you know, this is what the report is going to look like. It's going to be very long, 92 pages long. It is going to contain the home maintenance. It's going to contain the disclosure items. It's going to contain items that need to be repaired. What we are mostly concerned about are what I call the Fab Five. And I tell them, if it is roof, if it is structural or foundation, if it is plumbing or electrical, if it is HVAC, or if it is safety, these are the things that we're going to be really concerned about. Anything that doesn't fit in what I call those Fab Five categories typically is cosmetic in nature. We're not arguing over cosmetic items. We're not terminating a contract over cosmetic items. We are going to terminate a contract if you have concerns about any of these major systems or major concerns. Water intrusion, that falls under foundation for me, right? Or structural. Typically, I mean, you can go through every home inspection you've ever seen. Do most of the things fall into these Fab Five categories? Yes. If they don't, it's typically things that are going to be cosmetic in nature, okay? So setting the expectation on the front end too for your client, telling them that we are really only, it doesn't mean we can't ask for things that are outside of the Fab Five if we're asking for repairs, but it means we are going to primarily focus on the Fab Five, because the Fab Five are going to be the things that typically are the most costly, typically the things that are most concerned, and typically things that no matter who the buyer is, they're going to ask for these things to be repaired, right? It's not specific to you as the buyer or your taste or something like that. But it also keeps the client focused on things that matter. I'm telling you, in 25 years, I have argued with buyers and sellers and listing agents over things that nobody else would care about. It's just this buyer cares about it, right? Or this buyer just wants to get a win. They want to feel like the seller didn't get one up over on them, right? They want to feel like they got to ask for anything that they wanted to be repaired. And I've argued over dumb things. And I'm just telling you, when you set the expectation up front about the Fab Five, it sets the expectation of your client that we're not going to squabble over a switchblade cover. We're not going to argue over peeling wallpaper in the corner. We're not going to argue over this room wasn't painted properly or whatever. The door handle on the door is loose. You know, we're not going to squabble over things like that. Are you going to terminate the contract over this item? That's what you need to ask your client back to. If it's something that you feel like is trivial and cosmetic, or something that you feel like is not something another buyer would ask a seller to repair, you need to ask your client, are you going to terminate over this? Is this something that you feel strongly enough that you would not move forward if this was not done? And you'll get into really getting to the root of why they're asking for certain things. Are they just trying to get a deal? Are they looking for credits from the seller? Do they not want to even turn a screwdriver? I have some clients that are like, I'm not doing anything. When I move into this house, it better all be done, right? Everybody wants that HGTV experience where they show up and everything's already done, but life isn't that way. And houses don't come that way, especially in the market we're just coming off of, right? Where sellers literally could just put a sign in their yard and they didn't have to do much to their house because there wasn't any inventory. Now that the market is correcting in a lot of places, your house has to make the greatest first impression. And you need to have gone through the house and done some of those home maintenance things that you've been deferring or putting off or not taking care of, because the buyers are being pickier. There's more inventory to choose from. And they have the ability to ask for repairs because that seller has had their house on the market 90 days and they're freaking out because they've never seen a house for 90 days on the market in the last 5 to 7 years in some markets, right? So you just want to, for me, it's about establishing the Fab Five, keeping your clients focused on the Fab Five to make sure that they're not arguing over petty things and that they're not focused on the wrong thing, right? We want to focus on the big ticket items and things that make them concerned about moving forward with this house. Remember, that is the goal, right? Is this something you would terminate over? I remember one listing that I had in Spring Hill. The buyer and the seller were arguing over a fire pit. The fire pit was not even built into the ground or anything. It was just a fire pit from Lowe's for $200. Like, who cares? Like, are you going to terminate this contract over a $200 fire pit from Lowe's that's not even attached to the house? It's not even part of the yard. It can be picked up and moved. Like, why are we arguing about this, right? I'm trying to just teach you guys how to stay focused and keep your client focused on the things that matter. And all of that starts with setting proper expectations. It starts with educating them about what you're looking for in the report before you ever get the report. Does that make sense? Yeah. I get a lot less terminations when I explain the Fab Five on the front end and remind them on the back end. I'm telling you, when you get buyers that have never bought a house before and they get that 92-page report, the first thing they want to do is terminate, right? They haven't even absorbed it. They just see 92 pages and say, this isn't for me, right? We don't want that.
Yeah, and I always like to tell them that the inspector, and this is in my buyer's guide, that inspectors are not Superman. They cannot see through walls.
That's correct. If they are, they should be charging you triple, right? You know, but there are inspectors out there that do have infrared cameras that can tell if there's a lack of insulation. You might need a better inspector if somebody really wants a Superman kind of inspector.
Well, and those are honestly far and few between, especially here in Ohio, because it's only been within the last 3 years that home inspectors have even had to be licensed.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. That's crazy. That's scary, isn't it? Don't you think? I think that's very scary. Yeah. All right. So moving on, going through the report. So I make sure I go through the report and I'll highlight things that are part of the Fab Five, right? Because my Fab Five and their Fab Five, sometimes they're not the same. So I want them to understand like what you've addressed as a Fab Five is actually not electrical. It's a light bulb. Like, come on, like chill. We don't need to get the electrician out there to rewire the whole thing. It needs a new light bulb. chill. Like, let's test it out and make sure that it's a light bulb first, right? But I just want them to make sure that we're on the same page in terms of what we consider to be the Fab Five. So I go through the report, I highlight the things that are Fab Five. And when you were getting a package, Cat, too, one of the things that I recommended is don't skip going through the whole report. There are a lot of inspectors that they will give you a summary page with the defects, but if you actually go through the report, there's some things in the report that didn't end up on the summary. So be careful. Don't get caught up in just looking at the summary. Make sure you go through the whole report, because sometimes they miss some of the things that are inside the report and forget to put them on the summary. So I just want to make sure I said that again for you while you stepped away. So here are your options, and I know you know this, Kat, because you have experience, but here are your options once the home inspection is done. You have gone through the report with you and your client. You guys have identified the things that are really important to them or things that any other buyer might ask to be repaired, and you have three options. One is you can ask the seller to repair them. We're going to talk about how to do that in a minute. The second is you can ask for money in lieu of the repair, but do not write on any amendment or any part of your contract that says money instead of repairs. That is a trigger to the lender. The mortgage company does not like that. You're basically compromising their asset that they're using as collateral to lend on. When you say we're going to give money instead of repair, you're red flagging that there's repairs that are needed. You don't want to do that for the lender. So you would not write in lieu of repairs. You would just write a credit from the seller to the buyer in this amount. You don't say what it's for. You guys just sign off that no other repairs are requested, right? So you can do money. You can do a combination of the two. You can repair some items and ask for a credit for some other items that the seller doesn't want to do. Your third option is to terminate, right? Your buyer has the right, and again, check your state laws, but in most of the states that I've sold in most of the states, your buyer has the right to investigate anything and everything they want to investigate during that inspection period. So what I want to make sure I'm very crystal clear on, let's say that you're during your inspection period and the buyer talks to the next door neighbor and finds out that the next door neighbor is a racist. They don't want to live there. They've decided that this is not the right fit. Can they use their inspection contingency to get out of the contract? They can, right? Anything in that during that inspection period, if they find something that they don't like, you can use your inspection contingency to terminate that contract. So if they read the HOA documents and decide, I don't like that, if they talk to the neighbors and decide, I don't want to live next to this guy, if they find out that there are sex offenders that live nearby, or whatever the situation is, you typically can use your inspection period to terminate that contract, but you need to make sure that you are very careful about not missing any deadlines or timelines. Because if it's not during your inspection period and they later find that out, you might not be able to terminate and get your earnest. You might be able to terminate, but it might have a cost, right? There might be some litigation involved, or you might lose your earnest money or whatever that is. But I just want you to understand that anytime during that inspection period is your buyer's opportunity to investigate anything that is of importance to them. It does not necessarily have to be related to the mechanics of the house, right? It can be whatever they've deemed as a deciding factor for them. There are some agents across the country that will probably fight me on that. And I get it, right? I understand it. It all depends on how your contract is written and how the inspection contingency is written in your contract. But if there are buyers that just have remorse. They wake up the next day and they decide, I don't want to buy this house anymore. If they're still in their inspection contingency, there are agents that would use that inspection contingency to say, we're terminating, right? And they've done some due diligence and have decided this isn't for them. You're not going to force a buyer to buy a house if they're still in their inspection window. You just have to check what your contract says. But I just wanted to put it out there that there are some clients that it has nothing to do with the items that actually came up on the house. It has to do with, did they do some investigation and found some of the reason they don't want to buy this house, right? Is there something else that came up? But your job as the agent is to make sure that you're telling your clients any investigation that you're doing, any things that you want to make sure about, like anything that you have concerns about, you need to make sure you're doing during your inspection window, because that might be your only way to terminate it after that, right? After that, you may not have any other out if you change your mind or something comes up or you learn about it later, right? So you just want to make sure you're setting proper expectations, letting the client also know what their options are. Just like Kat said, I could send a handyman to the house for 2 hours. If you're not a handy person, you don't have a dad that's handy or a mom or whoever that can come fix these minor things that are kind of cosmetic or easy handyman fix, don't let that hang you up. Let's not terminate. I can help with that. I have solutions for that, right? The other thing is the things that come up on the inspection, you need to make sure that your client knows what is a big deal and what's not. This is where we open ourselves up to liability sometimes, because your idea of what's a big deal and another agent's idea of what's a big deal might be different, right? But if it's something that I could send a handyman out for 2 hours and have remedy, is it remedy? Is it something that can be remedied, right? 99.9% of things that I come across on a home inspection are actually really pretty fixable, right? They're things that can be fixed. But when it comes to the Fab Five, if it's structural or foundational, that's a harder fix, right? That might be much more costly. When you get to appliances or mechanicals that the inspector says are at the end of their life, right? The water heater, the HVAC, those kinds of things. You know, I had my first house that I ever bought, it had an oil heating system that was God knows how old. And of course, the inspector said, this is on its last life. Like it's probably going to die any day. That thing cranked for another 6 or 7 years. We never had a single problem with it, right? Because it was maintained properly. It was cleaned and serviced every year, you know, but they have to cover themselves and say it's an older unit. It's probably at the end of its life, but they can't predict when the end of that life is. And you need to make sure that your clients understand that. Remember, your client is going to rely on whatever this home inspector says as gold. They are going to rely on that inspector and trust that inspector. You want to make sure that you're hiring inspectors that make your clients aware, but don't scare, right? If they trust you as much as they trust this inspector, you have the ability to refine some of the things that the inspector says, things that they point out that they have kind of convinced the client it's a big deal, that you can show them, hey, this is actually pretty easy to fix. Let me connect you with my plumber and he can talk you through it. Let me connect you with my electrician. Let me connect you with my handyman and he can talk to you more about how this can be repaired pretty easily. But you should have solutions to the things that come up in the inspection. If you're a newer agent, you need to get a sample of a home inspection and ask your mentor or coach or somebody, how would you address these things? Because that's how you're going to learn through experience anyway. By the time you've seen your 9th or 10th inspection, you already know how to address them. But when you're new, or maybe you're not even a homeowner yourself, you don't know how to fix some of these things, right? But I would recommend you go through a report and identify, if I were to get these things repaired, who would I need to talk to? Who would I need an estimate from? How do I even know how much money to ask for if we want to do a credit instead of the repairs? I'm going to talk about that too in just a second. How do we even know how much money to ask for? You're going to have people in your arsenal that you can call that can help you estimate how much it's actually going to cost to do these things, right? I will tell you that buyers overestimate by about double what they think it actually costs to do. Just like when they walk into a house that the whole house needs to be painted, they immediately go, oh my God, it's going to cost me $20,000 to paint this whole house. No, it's not. They overestimate everything, right? So you want to have accurate numbers. You want to have accurate figures. Just a second ago, I said I was going to come, I missed my brain, I swear. I said I was going to talk about, I said to remind me, who orders the inspection,
Yes.
right? And then I also just said a second ago, I was going to talk about estimates, and I'll come back to that one in a second. Sorry. This is why I have notes, because I start talking and I go off on a tangent. So who orders the inspection? Let's talk about that for a second, real quick. I have had agents try to tell me, oh, I was always taught that I have to give my buyers 3 names and let them choose. Well, I understand that might take some liability off of you, that you say, I gave 3 names and let them pick. But I think I try to control as much of the transaction as I can, because I don't like leaving things up to chance, right? I work too hard to get us this far. I've traveled for a year looking at houses with these people, and now we're at the inspection, and I'm just going to leave it to chance for some inspector that I might not know, or an inspector that is scary, instead of making people aware. I don't want to take that risk, right? I also want an inspector that I know is thorough, does a good job. I've vetted him. They're a member of ASHI, so I know that they're a great inspector and they meet certain standards. That's ASHI, if you don't know that. It's just basically a professional organization that they have to meet certain standards to belong to. And so typically those inspectors are going to be more thorough, not always, right? But I don't leave that to the client to decide. My clients have never hired a home inspector. Most of them, they don't even know anybody. So why would they just go random to the phone book or Google and pick one when I can recommend someone that I have worked with, that my clients have been pleased with, that I know I can trust to be thorough, and that I know I can trust to explain things in a way that's not going to scare the shit out of my client, right? So I don't let the client choose their own. If they have an inspector, that's great. I have had clients that came that they did know an inspector and they wanted to use them. I'm fine with that. But if you don't know of anybody, I work with a great inspector. I've got a couple in my arsenal that I work with. And for this particular property, I really think this inspector would be the best one for you. Remember, you have to have different inspectors too for different types of properties that you have. If you're selling a log cabin, you need to find an inspector that knows something about log cabins. If you're selling, a property that is new construction, I've got an inspection company that does use infrared cameras that make sure that there's not, water in the walls or a lack of insulation or something like that, right? You've got to have a good group of inspectors, just like you have lenders that meet different clients. Your inspectors probably need to meet different requirements too. I also have an inspection company that's kind of overkill. They give you reports on anything and everything under the sun. Well, sometimes that can be too much for some clients, right? But my fact finders, my lawyers and Marine Corps fighter pilots and those people, they love that report because they like how it's presented. They like the color coding. They like all the detail. But some of my other clients would not like that. It's too much. It's overwhelming, right? So you've got to learn your client and learn what they like. But an answer to the question is, I'm doing the scheduling, I'm choosing the inspector, and typically my client trusts me to do that. But I'm always letting my client know it is your choice on who you select. It is your choice on who we hire. I can provide you with a recommendation, but it's ultimately your. Kat, were you going to say
Yeah, and
something?
that's the same way I do it. I really try to steer them to my preferred inspector, and then also, just say, hey, I actually just give two names because there's only two that I trust around here. And I say, it's your choice, but these are the two that I prefer. If you know someone or somebody's recommended someone to you, please feel free to use them, but they need to coordinate with me because I have to be there. So
Yeah.
And I have one inspector that I literally will follow him around. And then the other one's like, no, Kat, you're too much of a distraction. Just come an hour, at the last hour and we'll go through everything. So, and I like, I don't want to say discourage, but I tell my clients they can be there, but they don't need to be because I am. Because otherwise it ends up taking the inspector almost twice as long. They freak out over little things,
Yeah.
So, and I'll text them along the way and say, hey, everything's looking great, or, hey, there's a little bit of a concern with the roof, but we'll talk about it after we get the report, just so they know that I'm actually communicating with them and not just, playing on Facebook or whatever while I'm there.
Sure. A lot of us tell our clients to come the last hour of the inspection. That lets the inspector do his own business without having somebody following him around, asking him additional questions. In that last hour or two, typically they can come in and take measurements, take pictures or whatever they need to. That way we're not bothering the seller multiple times for showings or getting back in the house. They've already given that window anyway. So come the last hour usually helps. I agree with a lot of what you said, Kat. I feel like, they do ask a lot of questions. They want to bring their dad or grandpa or whoever as an additional inspector. And that, we always roll our eyes when that happens because dad is not, unless he's a builder or whatever, or has a background, he might be really handy.
I actually tell them they can't, that the only people that are allowed to be there is you, me, and the inspector.
Sure.
So
Sure.
just because, I mean, legally that is actually true because the liability does not extend to non-parties to the contract.
Yeah. It just depends on what you allow and what the listing agent allows you to bring, who they allow, but it's about setting expectations. Dad can come all he wants, but he has to keep his mouth closed, right? Like he can't ruin this. And I always tell him when they say, hey, can I bring my Uncle Bob? I will say things like, you can, but I'm not going to let you terminate the contract over anything Bob says. So I need you to listen to my advice. I need you to, I will talk with Uncle Bob about the things that he has concerns about, but I need you to trust me. I need you to listen to my advice, which is hard sometimes when they have people in their ears. But one of the things I was going to mention is I think every company across the country should have a disclosure, if you don't have one, that says any recommendations of vendors by your agent are just recommendations and that you have the right to choose any vendor for anything that you want in this purchase, right? There should be a cover my butt liability kind of disclosure that your client signs, that whether it's a lender, a home inspector, a title person, or an attorney, or even someone doing any of the work, all of those people are just recommendations, and that the client ultimately has the choice of who to hire. We're just making recommendations. I think if you own a firm in this country and you don't have something like that, you probably are opening yourself up to some litigation. It doesn't mean they'll win, but why go to court if you have something like that? Hey, I had them sign this in the very beginning of the transaction that said anybody I recommended was just a recommendation and that they have the right to hire whoever they'd like. They're not required to use the people that I recommend. I think that's important. All right, let's talk about how to ask for repairs. Okay. First of all, any repair, let's say that we have identified a couple of things that are on the Fab Five. We know these are things that any buyer might ask to be repaired, regardless of who the buyer is. And the buyer has said, I would like the seller to make these repairs. When you are drafting a repair amendment or whatever it's called in your state, you need to be very specific about who is doing, like what is to be repaired, how it's to be repaired, by whom, and what evidence do you need to demonstrate that it has been repaired. So what I see all the time as a broker, like when I was owning my own company, I would see repair amendments that would come across my desk all the time that would say seller to repair leak in master bathroom. That's it. Well, that's not specific. How do you want it to be repaired? And who has to repair it? Does it have to be a licensed plumber, or is it just a, handyman, or can the seller repair it themselves? There are some states that this clause is already written into your purchase and sale agreement, but there are a lot of states that it is not. And so what I'm telling you is, for clarification, to make sure that you don't have disappointed clients, and so that it's done properly, you need to be very specific in your repair request that says what is to be repaired, how it's to be repaired, by whom, and what evidence do you need. Typically, that's going to look like this. Let's say there's some reverse polarity that happened, that you're going to come across that on every inspection in every house probably, where there's reverse polarity on one of the outlets, which just means that the wires are reversed inside the outlet, right? It can be a safety issue. It's definitely an electrical situation. It's not super expensive. You don't have to replace the whole outlet. You typically just have to swap the wires around and put the cover back on. But let's say it's of concern to your client, right? And your client says, I want this repaired. You would write on your repair request that the seller is to hire a licensed electrician to repair any and all outlets with reverse polarity, right? Correcting that issue or correcting it, and a receipt from the electrician would be required prior to closing. Now you can, if you lump in all your repairs, you can put receipts required at the very bottom, but bottom line is what I don't want you doing is writing repairs and then not saying who is supposed to do it. So for example, I've seen a lot where the agent just writes the rotten wood to be replaced around the door frame. Okay, well, does the wood have to be primed? Does it have to be painted? Can a handyman do it? Can the seller do it himself? Do you want a licensed contractor? You need to be cautious though. Don't ask for a licensed contractor to do something that a handyman can do. That's not fair. That's expensive too. Like if it's something that just a handyman can screw with a screwdriver, why are you asking for a licensed and insured contractor to do that? Do you know how hard it is to find a licensed and insured contractor that wants to come to your house to fix a wobbly ceiling fan? Good luck, right? So I'm just saying, be reasonable. Is it something that you expect somebody to be highly qualified to do? When it comes to plumbing and electrical, yes, I want a highly qualified person. I want a licensed plumber to fix it. I want a licensed electrician to do this. But do I need a contractor to tighten up a railing? Probably not. Do I need a contractor to, think of 100 things. There's a lot of, I don't necessarily need a contractor, but what I want to make sure that you're doing is being very specific in your repair request, because what's going to happen is if you're not, your buyer's going to show up for the final walkthrough and you're going to see that they did replace the rotten wood, but the raw wood is there now. You didn't say you wanted it painted, and now you're upset because it's raw wood and now your client has to paint it. You didn't say how you wanted it repaired, right? So if you're leaving that open to interpretation, you're going to leave it open to being frustrated and being upset, right? Does that make sense? So I want you to be very specific. What is to be repaired, how it's to be repaired, by whom, and what evidence do you need? Sometimes the evidence is photographs. I'll tell you right now, I'm a big girl. I'm not climbing into that crawl space to go look to see if the vapor barrier is stretched corner to corner and installed properly. You're going to send me photographs of that while the contractor who's doing it is putting it down there. Have them take some pictures, because I'm not crawling under the house. Now, your client may have your inspector come back for $200 or $300, whatever they charge for a reinspection. If you want them to reinspect the things that you called out to be repaired, that is an option, right? You can have the inspector come back out to look at that, but it is probably going to incur a fee. But if your client is distrustful, maybe the seller has lied about a few things already, or maybe the negotiations haven't gone well and they don't have faith that things are done properly, ask for evidence. What evidence do you need? A receipt or pictures? What do you need? I will tell you, I'm not saying you have to do this on every time you get a receipt, but if you smell something funny, dig into it a little further. I had a client in Spring Hill once, this is in Spring Hill, Tennessee, that we represented the buyer, and the negotiations were very hard to even get to this point to begin with. And so there was a lot of hard feelings between the buyer and the seller. And the buyer had requested this leak in the primary bedroom, in the primary bathroom, to be repaired, how it was to be repaired, the whole 9 yards. And the listing agent provided receipts for it. And my agent actually called the plumbing company, and the plumbing company admitted to her that they never even went out to the house, that they never did the repair, that they were asked by the agent to produce a receipt for work that was not done. Like, in what world, right? And I'm not saying you would check behind every receipt you receive, but I'm saying if things are tumultuous or you don't trust that it's accurate, do some extra diligence and make sure that it actually was done, or get it re-inspected, or whatever that is. Don't take their word for it that it was done without some kind of proof of a receipt or a photo or re-inspection or something like that. Okay. I just have learned the hard way that there are liars out there. And they will lie if they can, right? So whatever your client needs to rest assured that it has been taken care of properly is what you need, right? So what evidence do you need? All right, how are you going to negotiate on your behalf? We're coming to the end of this. So number one, are these repairs going to be asked for by other people, or is this something specific to you? Is this something that your buyer is wanting just to ask for, or is this something that any reasonable buyer would likely ask, right? Are there any mitigating risks to the seller? So this comes up to me. If you're going to ask the seller to do all kinds of repairs, is there something that you can give the seller to let them know, hey, once we get this part done, we're good to go. There's no question about our financing. There's no question about us terminating. We can remove the other contingencies. Is there anything you can do before you ask a seller to invest $20,000 in repairs to help them feel assured that you're not going to terminate, right? I've had a lot of clients ask a seller for repairs, and then the buyer's financing falls apart. So was there something I could have done on the listing agent side to make sure before I commit my seller to spending money on these repairs, can I make sure that there's nothing that's going to come up? I don't want my seller to invest money in this property on behalf of this buyer when that buyer might not actually go through to closing, right? You just, as a listing agent, you just want to check, are there any mitigating factors that could cause a concern before your client agrees to fixing things? Is this something they would likely have to fix for everybody, or is this something particular to this buyer? If it's particular to this buyer, I want some reassurance that the buyer is not going to walk away or that this is going to make it to closing, right? You don't want your seller to invest $10,000 in something that really was a cosmetic thing. Maybe they agreed to paint the walls, but that's specific to that buyer, right? You don't want them to invest $10,000 in painting and then the buyer terminates because they can't get financing, right? And then the color that they picked is not even something somebody else wants, right? So are there any mitigating factors that you can reduce for the seller to make them feel more comfortable about agreeing to do your repairs if you're negotiating on behalf of your client? Is there a win-win for both parties available? Or is somebody a pit bull with a bone in their mouth, right? Typically, there's going to be an agent that's a pit bull with a bone in their mouth. There's somebody who is like, I'm going to fight to the death to get what I want from my client. That's not collaborative, that's not cooperative, and that's not how you negotiate on behalf of you. That might make you a strong negotiator in your world, but in a lot of worlds, it makes you a bully, right? Did you steamroll over the other agent? Is this the right way to go about negotiating, right? So I would just tell you, are you being cooperative or collaborative, right? What does that look like? Is there a win-win for both people? Meaning, do both people feel like this is fair, or does one person feel like they're being taken advantage? Right? Do you need more time to evaluate? If you have come up to a situation where something needs more time to evaluate, but your inspection window actually expires tomorrow, see if you can get some more time to extend that resolution period or extend that inspection period. What in the world? I don't even know what just happened. And mind your words carefully. Again, a lot of agents, in an attempt to advocate for their client, come off as being rude and disrespectful and not understanding that there are other parties involved here too. So I try to use words like, this is of most importance to my client, or this is really concerning to my client. They're very worried about the status of this septic tank, or they're very concerned about the foundational issues, or about addressing the water intrusion or the fungus, that's grown in the crawl space or something like that. So, I mean, if you have a client that is concerned about something and you know that it's one of their hot buttons that they might terminate over something like this, you need to choose your words very carefully and make sure that you're painting a very crystal clear picture to the listing agent and saying, my client is very concerned about this. This is something that is a deal breaker for them. This is something that we need to address. Don't use words like, well, my client wants this or they're going to terminate. Like, to me, that's a threat. And the way I said it earlier is a lot more easily swallowed. This is something that's really concerning to them. I think we should be able to talk about how we can resolve this so that they don't terminate. That sounds very different, doesn't it, than if you don't fix this, we're going to terminate. Like, don't back me into a corner. Let's basically say that this is a concern to my client, and I think we can find a resolution, right? But don't just say, if you don't fix this, we're going to terminate. I feel like that's not how you negotiate on behalf of your clients. And your words matter. You got to remember too, when you are working a deal with a client, that other agent on the other end of the transaction is somebody that you are also building rapport and trust with for future transactions, especially for somebody like Kat, who's in various areas of their smaller towns, maybe, or smaller, she's in bigger cities, but if you do work in smaller towns and you find yourself working with the same agents over and over and over again, you can't come in like a bulldog on a pit bull on a bone and bulldoze everybody and be a bully and think that people are going to want to work with you, right? They know that that's going to be exhausting. So then maybe they don't start accepting your client's offers. You need to think about that in the word choice you use too, and how you speak to other agents, how you negotiate on your client's behalf. You just need to prioritize what's most important to your client and how can I get a win for my client that also makes the seller feel like they didn't get taken advantage of. That's really important. And that's my other question is what is the most important to both parties? Sometimes you have to remind the listing agent, listen, our goal here is to get to the closing table. We can get to the closing table if A, B, and C are done. How do you suggest we get A, B, and C done that would make the seller happy? Right? Is there a win here that we both can have so that we can get to the closing table? You don't want one party to feel like, and when the pendulum of the market swings to the extremes, like where it is a very much a buyer's market and very much a seller's market, one party is not going to feel like they're winning anything. They're going to feel taken advantage of because they're giving up everything to make this deal work, right? But when we are in a correction mode or in the middle, both parties should be able to get a win somewhere, right? And if you are highly focused on just the Fab Five and you're not fighting over cosmetic things or dumb things that every other buyer would ask for, you're going to remind the listing agent of that. Hey, we kept our request relegated to the things that matter, things that are important, things that are the most expensive or most concerning to a buyer. We didn't ask you for everything on the report, right? Do not, under any circumstances, I don't care who taught you this, do not attach an inspection and say fix everything. You also do not send an inspection report without asking the agent if it's okay. You are opening that agent up to liability and opening them up to disclosure issues that they may not want. Because once you send that whole report to the listing agent, they're now bound by law to disclose anything that's not fixed. And now their seller is going to potentially have to disclose items that they learned about in that inspection. They may not want the inspection report. So you don't send the report without asking the agent, would you like a copy of the report? Or do you just want me to send you the pages that pertain to our requests? But please don't send the whole report to the agent. You're going to upset a lot of listing agents, right? So, and also don't attach the report and say fix everything. That's garbage. What do you want fixed, by whom, how, and what evidence do you need, right? So obviously, if you're sending me a 92-page report and you write on an amendment, fix everything, I'm going to kick it back to you and go, this is unacceptable. You need to make a legitimate request, right? You just have to remember at the end of the day, who do you represent? The other thing I want you to do is make sure during this process, this is right when buyers start to get antsy. This is where they start to backpedal. This is where they start to have doubts. Is this the right house for me? Especially when a 92-page report comes across the table. Your job always, and especially during this process, is to remind them you are on their team. You're on their side. I am here to advocate for you. I'm here to help you navigate this process. I'm here to help you negotiate the items. I'm on your side. Any advice that I'm giving you is because my experience tells me what a client should be looking for, or what a seller is willing to fix, or what you should expect in terms of monetary value for this type of repairs, because I've seen it for 25 years. I'll tell you what it costs. You know, Kat was mentioning earlier $2,000 for a water heater. I can do that for $900. Yeah, that's typically what it costs around like our area. Right? I don't know what it costs in her area, but in my area, $900 or $1,000, I can get a water heater. Right? So from experience, I know what things cost. If you don't know what things cost, you need to have people you can call. They can give you accurate estimates. A lot of my people can look at the report and give me an estimate based on just the report. It might not be down to the dollar. You know, sometimes they have to see it in order to estimate it, but at least it will give you a ballpark figure. There are also a lot of inspection companies out there that have some software that can price various repairs that come up, and they'll go ahead and give you that when they give you the report. But a lot of those are inflated prices. So just be careful if you're using a pre-populated or generated amount that you don't know if you feel comfortable with that. Just, you know, get someone else that can give you a better idea. The other thing is when you're asking for money in lieu of repairs, remember, it doesn't always have to cost exactly what the repair costs. Is the buyer satisfied if they got half of it covered, or three-fourths of it covered, or the parts, and maybe the buyer only had to pay the labor, or whatever that is. In the world of negotiation, remember, it's not a X equals Y or everything that they want to be repaired. We have to get down to the last dollar squeeze that turnip out of the seller. It's does the buyer feel like they got somewhere with the seller, some contribution towards fixing or remedying these things. It does not have to be exactly what it costs to repair. It's a contribution to it. Did the seller contribute to it? Right? And that might be satisfactory to the buyer. There's some buyers it won't be. If it costs $1,200, I want $1,200, right? You're going to have to learn to walk through with your client. What is the end goal? What do you need to have peace of mind to get to the closing table, to not walk away from this house? And that's how you're going to prioritize what's most important to them. You're going to ask them questions like that. Let's go through this report and let's identify what's most important. Sometimes I will tell them pick three things that are the most important to you, and then let's address what's left, right? But if it's a competitive situation where I know they had multiple offers, I might remind my client, hey, they don't have to actually do any of your repairs because they have other buyers that are interested in their property that may not ask for any of these repairs. So is there something you can give on your side to let the seller know you didn't ask for everything? You only asked for the things that were priority, that were stat one items, right? Things that are the most concern to you. At the end of the day, I want you to be collaborative. I want you to set proper expectations with your client. I want you to help your client identify what's most important and what's scary and what's not. I want you to properly ask for repairs by identifying who's going to do it, how, what evidence do you need, and what is to be repaired specifically. I want you to be very specific in your request so that you're not leading people to disappointment. You do not want to show up with raw wood because you forgot to ask for it to be painted, right? Otherwise, you better get a paintbrush out and start stroking up and down. And then just negotiating on your client's behalf. How do we get a win-win for everybody? Do I need to be a bulldog? Do I have to be a pit bull? Is there some way we can collaborate together to come up with a solution? Remember, we're not in gangs. We can work together to come up with a solution. There's agents that are way smarter than me, that have seen more than I have, or maybe have encountered this before. They also know their client better than I do. They know what's important to their client too. We can work together to come up with a solution, and sometimes you can't. And if you can't, you terminate. And you just follow through with the paperwork to terminate. But at the end of the day, before you terminate, my advice to you is to make sure that your client understands every house we look at is likely going to have some of these deferred maintenance issues, some disclosure issues, and some defects. Don't freak out when you see a 92-page report, because you're going to see them on every house. But are there things that come up on this report that make you not want to move forward with purchase? Does that make sense? Does that help? Good. Any questions for me? Okay. That's it. I'm going to leave you. Join me next week. Same bat time, same bat channel. And go out and have a great week this week. Okay.
Thanks, Laura.
You're welcome. Have a good day.
Thanks, you too.